Yeah, so if you don't know me, I'm Dr. David Bennett. I'm from Oxford University, and I have completed a doctorate on the queerness of gay celibacy. So how does gay celibacy, that's non-repressive, that takes a roughly historical view of human sexuality in terms of the Christian tradition, but is also taking gay experience seriously. What does that non-repressive kind of celibacy that also involves gay identity, like how is that queer? Is it queer? And so that's been my doctoral work. And I started with Augustinian conceptualities because Augustine is the master of ambivalence. So he is really against this idea that like you are the city of God and they are the city of earth. No, every human being is a mixture of the city of God and city of earth. There's no one human that is fully there yet. There's always this kind of ambivalent relationship between goodness and the privation of goodness. It's all mixed together. But a day will come when the city of God and the city of earth are fully, finally defined and extricated from each other. So this is a kind of anthropology, the political theology of Augustine. And then there's another element that I think is really helpful in how he understands sexuality, which is that Augustine sees sexuality as part of the pre-fall reality. So before humanity is affected by sin and death and turns away from the divine presence in sin, there's a sense in which we were already sexual beings. We're already drawn to sexual and marital reality. Whereas for pretty much the rest of the church fathers and mothers saw sex and marriage as an after effect of the fall. Because now we die, we have to procreate, so here's marriage. Whereas Augustine disagrees with that and thinks there's something more sacramental, more essential about sexuality to the human being. So when I was in my doctoral examination, they were like, why did you choose Augustine for this project? Why wouldn't you choose every other church father that sees the pre-full state as celibate? Like, why would you choose? And I said, because that dignifies gay orientation and says that it actually has a relationship to a pre-full reality. Otherwise, we should just get rid of gay orientation. It doesn't really have any value. It's just the product of the fall. Well, it's not just a product of the fall. It's also referring back to sexuality being an original gift within our humanity. And so sexuality, particularly same-sex orientation, is a perfect area where we need ambivalence and we need tension theologically. It doesn't fit into an either-or as easily anthropologically. And that's why we all struggle with it. That's why it's not easy. That's why it causes more pain, but it brings more glory. And I think that's a missing perspective. So I'm going to jump into a little bit of my story first. You know, I start my story as an atheist gay activist. Many of you in the room have already heard that. I'm not going to tell the whole story, but I was very much like a cardboard cutout, kind of new atheist, progressive, who hated Christianity and wanted it to be gone. I very much believed the secularizing thesis that Christianity would eventually disappear and LGBTQI+ people would finally be free, and let's move on. And a faculty like this would have been my enemy, and I would just want to move on with life, until Jesus crashes into my life through a debate with my uncle in 2008, where we exchanged ideas on God, and I tried to defeat him as a postmodernist, and he tried to then show me actually the problem with postmodernism was that it was post-enlightenment arrogance turned in on itself, and that truth is a person, not a concept in our head. And so the whole, intellectual Western tradition is kind of white, heterosexual males, men of reason, trying to understand everything objectively, and that wasn't great. But postmodernism kind of paradoxically does that with intersectional difference and doesn't lead us to truth either. So we're stuck in this kind of quagmire. So then he gave me Jesus as the person who is the truth. And then I stormed out and was like, whatever, you're self-righteous heterosexual, go burn in your own self-created hell. And then he had a vision of me being saved in a month's time. And what happened in a pub in the gay quarter of Sydney, when a lovely person who was a filmmaker, inclusive filmmaker, working with disabled people, or differently abled people in film, like kind of offered me prayer, and I experienced the love of God. So that's my background, and that sent me on a long journey to then study at Oxford, and then to start to ask these kinds of questions, because I went from a side A positionality for the first 3 years of my Christian walk, which believed that, of course, God would have nothing against gay marriage. It's love. So next, God loves love. there's no problem here, to a side B positionality, where actually I thought, no, it is misaligned with the created order in Scripture, and so I'm going to have to give up the option of a gay marriage. However, I get to be fabulous, made glorious. I get to be like, a eunuch riding on the clouds with fire with Jesus. There's this very special place for me and my queerness, and actually granting that misalignment with the created order is actually the foundation of my queerness, because there's nothing essentially different to me and a straight person if the progressive view is true. The side A view is true. I'm not really that queer. I'm just like everyone else. Sociologically, I'm queer, but not ontologically. So weirdly, this side B view that isn't side Y and X, side Y is like gay identity is bad, get rid of gay community, like just become conservative Christian, and that's the end of the story. Try to get married if you can, don't worry, or if you can't, like maybe repress yourself, don't repress yourself. But we don't have the desire theology to make sure you don't repress yourself. That's side Y. And then side X is like, let's try to change. Let's get God to change one's orientation. So I kind of refused that, and then eventually let go side A, and then found side B. And so I think Augustine and this lecture became really important. So I'm shaped by 3 kinds of convictions. One, I'm against both the liberal capitulation to just like revisionism and the conservative cruelty that puts a static natural ethic on LGBTQ plus people to suffer. I think both are really bad, and I'm trying to find, however imperfectly, a way where Jesus is radically figured beyond the dialectic of liberal and conservative. And you can tell me if I failed after when you ask me questions. But I'm trying to find this way, and my life is an experiment. I think all of our lives are experiments. Like to say we know that what we're doing perfectly, like no one does, like we're on our way. We're pilgrims on a journey. And so I'm inviting you into the pilgrimage that I'm living, not into a positionality that I've worked out perfectly. So I really value that you've all come here to listen to me and to contribute to the conversation from your angle. Secondly, desire is never the enemy. Disordered desire is. And so in every desire that's not rightly ordered is a good desire that it refers to. So in some sense, desire is good. Now that might sound really, David, like we know that. But actually that idea that your desires are good is radical in classical philosophy before Christianity. And Augustine in City of God 14 is one of the first to say to the pagan classical Roman tradition, negative emotions like desire and grief and shame, you can fill in the blank, even anger, are good emotions. Before that, there was no value in them. They were things to be extirpated, to be removed in the Stoical tradition. And in other traditions, they were just trivial. Who cares? It's a bit of extra emotional baggage, but here's philosophical truth. But right at the heart of Christian anthropology is this idea that the incarnation affirms negative human emotions. Jesus weeps, Jesus desires, Jesus thirsts, Jesus grieves. Jesus is full of mercy towards the poor. And Augustine berates the pagan judge who cannot feel the difficulty of those they're judging, and says, you are a terrible judge. My God is the perfect judge, because in the person of Jesus, he feels the negative situation of the person he's judging and has mercy and grace for that person. So this is a kind of microcosm on a juridical level of a clash between a Christian incarnational view of emotion that Augustine brings in and the pagan world before it. And Tom Holland has released a recent book called Dominion, which compares the world before Christianity morally to today. It's to today's kind of ethics, which come from Christianity, and it's just wild how sick you will feel when you read his descriptions of what the Roman pagans did to people and how they lacked an essential humanism that could give human beings value. That is such a deeply Christian. And so I think it's a Christian thing, and I don't think we would have a positive view of sexual orientation if it wasn't for Augustine. If that didn't happen in the Christian tradition, we wouldn't care about our sexual orientation. It would not be important. But something happened in this Augustinian tradition that gave sexual orientation a high value. And so everyone living after it is, however liberal or progressive, is an Augustinian, whether they like it or not, or at least they are referring back to Augustine to say that sexual orientation, desire matters, that it can be good, that it's important. So celibacy, third conviction, is not a consolation prize. It's an eschatological sign. So I'm not waiting for some far-off reality in my celibacy. I get to be a sign of the world to come. And I said this in my summer Owasa talk that it seems to resonate with Danes, that I'm starting the party early as a celibate. I'm not missing out. No, I'm getting more fullness through my lack. And so there's this Christological pattern in the gospel that the one that lacks is actually the one that's full. Zacchaeus, who lacks righteousness morally, is a completely despicable human being, but loves God and desires Jesus. He is actually a son of Abraham. And all the people who do the right things and try to maintain the covenant through the law, God's displeased with them because they don't have that root of love. So there's this relativization away from celibacy is just something of lack through moral obedience, to space, to allow the fullness of the kingdom to manifest in a way that you can't when you're married. But also to live in the shape of Jesus, who was the new creation Adam, and his mother didn't sleep with a man because he was the new creation. There was no procreation anymore. Mary had to be a virgin because it wasn't about some moral thing with sex. It was about this whole new world being born through Mary into a new Adam that we are now saved into. So celibacy somehow figures that mysteriously. And so does marriage also point to that fullness to come in a different way. So these are three convictions. So the modern sexual self, what are we actually disagreeing about when we disagree about homosexuality? So Charles Taylor, in its secular age, describes the late modern subject as buffered, insulated from transcendence, tasked with self-authorship. And that was me, as a young 14-year-old, thinking, I'm rejected by this moral taskmaster, deist God, who's allowed creation to just play out in its cruel way, leave me with this difference of desire, and then condemn me for it. Not the incarnational God that comes down and wrestles within that reality of mystery with me as a eunuch for the sake of the kingdom. So sexuality becomes the privileged site of self-authorship. It's to name my desires, to name myself. So what happened in Christianity to set up this moment is that we ended up with a dualism between eros and agape. We said your intimate desire, longing for intimate connection is bad, and this self-sacrificial divine love that doesn't care about itself but gives everything to the other in dispossession through Jesus is the holy good love. And we created a society where eros was bad, and then it fought back and retook eros and said, what really matters is my eros, and I'm going to assert that as my true self. But what can happen in the Christian tradition is something far more exciting, which Pope Benedict XVI talks about in Deus Caritas Est, God is love, his famous encyclical. In my view, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, work of theology in the last century, in terms of what love is. Eros has lost its nobility in the fall. Agape comes with its own eros to redeem human eros back to agape again. So this is like the metaphysical structure of love that we lost in the Lutheran Reformation a little bit, and then really badly in Anders Nygren, a Swedish theologian that you can now bash. No, I'm joking. No, but I really don't agree with Nygren, where he writes this text, is he extricates eros from agape. So the only place you can really legitimately experience intimacy is in sex within marriage, not elsewhere. And it becomes kind of reduced down just to sex. So then the gay community fights to get gay marriage so that it can express itself. And we did it fabulously. from the conservatives. So this is the kind of after effects of all these big metaphysical and theological things that happen. We're not just living in a vacuum. You get the point. So identity has acquired a quasi-sacred status. To question desire is to annihilate the person. The consequence is the theological grammar of created nature, ordered love, and eschatological hope is untranslatable in this frame. We find ourselves as Christians wordless, like, I don't know what to say. It's untranslatable. Hence, there's a deadlock. The church looks cruel because it asks someone to crucify what they take to be their very self. The truly and most fundamental desire is sex. You're saying I have to say no to that. You're destroying me. But if the most fundamental desire in a human being isn't sex, it's actually for God, then you're not destroying the person. You're just asking them to reconfigure their loves, which is a normal discipleship task, albeit with an extra layer of suffering and difficulty. But that's what generates our queerness. And in the kingdom means we get a greater glory and a name better than sons and daughters, which you find in Isaiah 56, which is given to the eunuch. So our task is not better arguments within the frame, but a patient dismantling of the frame itself. We need to dismantle this, and I think already in Gen Z it's being dismantled with this desire for authenticity. And that desire for authenticity is a reference above to something transcendent within the now. So there's a desire coming. I don't just want to be shut into myself. I want myself to be ordered by something greater than myself. So why I think both responses fail. The progressive move blesses the late modern identity, reads scripture through anthropology of expressive authenticity. The cost is that the cross disappears, and with it, the eschatological shape of Christian discipleship. All are affirmed and none are transfigured. There's no real transformation. You just stay as you are, really. And then scripture's most radical claim that desire itself is to be ordered by grace is quietly abandoned. You don't need to reorder your desire. Why? Unless it's kind of consent-based. And this is where you end up with the kind of more progressive Episcopalians that are saying we should have polycules and polyamory and we should expand relational boundaries to however we feel we want to. And then you get the reactive conservative move, so accepts the same anthropology but inverts the valence. The same-sex attracted person becomes a problem to be solved. The cost, the church becomes, in Job's phrase, a collective of miserable comforters, offering diagnosis where grace is needed and heterosexuality where holiness is called for. So it's kind of like a self-righteous heterosexuality. You think you're okay with God because you're straight, rather than you actually know the love of God and you're justified by faith. Your heterosexuality doesn't make you right with God, and your heterosexuality is also deeply flawed. And so you often feel this strange thing with straight Christians in the church, like, I'm in a better situation, you have to lack all of that. And I'm there going, I get the fullness. I'm better than you in a sense. Like, not because of me, but because of my lack. So there's a lack of understanding of the cross on the conservative side, that it's not just what saved me, it's the way and shape and form of how we are glorified. It's through our wounds, it's through our sufferings, it's through our differences that God is glorified, and we participate in the divine nature. So the cross is weirdly lost in this weird kind of, like, in this conservative Christian society. And same-sex attracted is treated as a kind of sick disease rather than a place where grace may do unexpected work. So both moves leave the buffered self intact. The theological task is to recover an older, deeper account of what a human being actually is, but to update it with what we have also learned about gay experience, queer theory, and that's the work you theological students should be doing, at least in these questions, and creating a more humble conversation around sexuality and gender. And I've told you about, like, I come to a point on all of this where it all gets too mysterious, and it's a bit like being at a wedding that's really beautiful, and the spouses are in love, and God is present, and you can't speak because it's just too much. And I think that's the point. There's an apophatic limit with sexuality and gender where you have to stop sometimes. Stop thinking about it. Just live and love your neighbor as yourself and love God and keep going as this pilgrim on a journey. So we're always in via. Like, I often deceive myself in thinking I've landed, I found it, I've got the ethic. But we're always learning. We're always on our way. And yet we need convictions to root us, to order our loves so we stay on the right track to Jesus in the end. So I like to say we're not homo liturgicus, we're not homo something, we are essentially homo amorous. We are love-shaped beings. I think this is the most fundamental statement about human beings. We are obsessed with love. And I think that the Trinity is the best explanation for why, and I think the Christian tradition contains the best explanation for why we're obsessed with love, sex, and desire. It's because it's the outfit, the inner kind of capacity to participate in the divine life. That's why we have desire, that's why we're obsessed with love. But it's not through sex, making sex the ultimate, that we do that. It's through allowing God to be the central, most profound or fundamental desire. Sarah Coakley calls this the proto-erotic desire for God. It's the desire right at the heart that God touched in the pub when I was that gay activist that hated Christianity. And so when we think about desire and the will, when the will abandons what is above itself and turns to what is lower, it becomes evil. Not because the thing to which it turns is evil, but because the turning itself is wicked. So there's something about our will that gets out of order with God's created structures and also virtue and how to love rightly. And I would say a gay relationship in my worldview is not against God's will because of anything to do with the virtue of gay people. It's more a created order or structure problem than a virtue problem. It's not a perverse, sick class of people. It's just because God has created the world this way to point to a future. And if we change the sign, then we change what it signifies. If we change marriage, then it doesn't point to the future that it's supposed to point to anymore. So the Augustinian grammar is structural, not moralizing. Every created thing is good, every love is a turning, sin is not the presence of desire, but its misordering, the preferring of a lesser good to the greater good or the summum bonum. On this account, every human being, gay or straight, married or celibate, is a creature of disordered love in need of the same grace. This is the great equalizer Augustine hands to pastoral theology. So this is not a clobber text, it's a diagnostic. The sequence is theological, not moralistic. Paul's argument begins with idolatry in Romans 1. The human creature exchanges the creator for creatures. Disordered sexuality is presented as the symptom, not the root. The sin Paul diagnoses is the ontological inversion from which all misloving or misfired desire flows. And Romans 1 convicts the church as much as the world. The rhetorical trap of verse 2:1 in Romans, who knows what that is? You should all know. You are without excuse, you Judaizers who think that you're better than the Gentiles, who do these same-sex activity things, who exchange creator for creature. You think you're better than them. You think that you're justified by your legal obedience to the law. You're not. You have no excuse because you do the same things, and you judge those who do the same things. So Paul flattens, again, there's no righteousness outside faith in Jesus Christ. Your sexual obedience doesn't make you righteous. It's a fruit of an inner righteousness. So any homiletic use of Romans 1 that lets the congregation off the hook has betrayed Paul's logic. If we just read it and say homosexuality is wrong and that's all you get from the text, you haven't read Romans 1. You haven't read Romans 1-3. You don't understand Paul's gospel. You're actually an enemy of it if that's all you read. Paul says, I'm unashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of salvation unto whosoever believes, first Jew, then Gentile. So we have to read the whole argument in Romans 1-3. I think Augustine's theology is really emerging out of those dialectics in Romans 1-3. So third point, the telos is reordered love, not reassigned desire. Paul does not promise that those whose loves have been disordered by the fall will have their desires rearranged to match the ordinary pattern of creation. He promises something greater, participation in the love of God poured out into our hearts by the Spirit through our weakness. So we will have big weaknesses, and somehow through that love being poured out in our hearts, God is glorified more maximally in the weakness than if he just took away all the misalignment. And hence, there are gay Christians like me. Ding! And there are all sorts of other Christians with all sorts of other things that they wrestle with that need to be adjudicated differently. There's no perfect analogy that you can construct to homosexuality. It's not like alcoholism. It's not like a murderous desire. It is its own thing in and of itself. And therefore, we have to listen to gay experience. That's the only way we can really understand it. You can't understand it perfectly through analogy. So now we're just going to talk about marriage, friendship, and the shape of the world to come. I'm going through this fast because I want to give you guys a big picture that you can inhabit when you're wrestling with these questions, not just tell you to adopt what I think. I want you to wrestle with this in your own tradition well. And so I'm trying to provide some of the resources that help me do that. So Augustine says in De Magistro, realities signified are to be valued more highly than their signs. So marriage is a sign, a sacramentum, and in Ephesians 5, it signifies the union of Christ and the church. It's not ultimate. It is ordered to an ultimate reality beyond itself. At the resurrection, marriage ends because the signified has arrived. So whilst we are living in a time where the signified hasn't fully arrived, marriage is still good, we still marry. But there's a time coming when something better will fully manifest and marriage will pass away and the wedding feast of the Lamb will be our reality, whatever that will be. If experienced it, let me know. Male and female image God together. Genesis 1 speaks of Adam divided into sexual difference, each male and female. Ezer kenegdo. Ezer means deliverer. Yes, men in the room, women were created by God to deliver you from yourself. And men, likewise, work in a similar way to women. We need each other. We need that difference. We need that diversity, or we can't be human. It is human to be diverse. And it is the image of God to be diverse, and yet one. Do you see that logical pattern being referred into creation through male and female? And then kenegdo, opposite alike. When Adam looks at Eve, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, like me, and yet different to me, who is this person? She's different to me. So we need both the difference and the likeness in our relationships. The church has to be a place where women and men are completely able to flourish, like each other, and yet different to each other. And we all know how hard that one is, but it's worth it. So this is the diversity and unity of Trinitarian life in human form in the body. And in the sacrament of marriage, this is reflected intensely physically. It is still an erotic relation in non-sexual relationships, but it is not physically instantiated in friendship necessarily. You can have spiritual friendship between men and men, women and women. You don't need sexual difference. But in marriage, you do need sexual difference. It's a one flesh union. So the idol of marriage distorts both sides of the pew. When the church treats marriage as the telos of Christian flourishing, it absolutizes the sign and impoverishes the single. The soulmate mythology of Greek paganism is, as Augustine saw, a pagan resacramentalization of eros, not a Christian sacrament. To say you need to find a soulmate to be whole is not Christian. To say you need other gendered people in your life to be whole is a Christian and a Jewish affirmation. Okay, so we need otherness and difference, but we don't need sex to be whole. So that's kind of my point. Friendship is at the center of the kingdom, not marriage. Marriage is central, but not the center. Jesus is celibate. He affirms marriage, but he privileges friendship. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. Marriage is ordered to this age. Friendship persists beyond it. In the resurrection, all are friends, none are spouses. David, Jonathan, your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. Jesus and the beloved disciple. The Johannine corpus names friendship, not marriage, as the image of union with Christ. Marriage in its true form is a societas amicalis, a society of friendship, bearing the threefold goods of fides, proles, and sacramentum, faithfulness, procreation, and sacramental good of reflecting God's nature in the body. Same-sex Christians, attracted Christians, or gay Christians are not excluded from the center of ecclesial life. friendship is the center, and so they can be included in that. And they are only excluded from one created good to be more radically included in its eventual transformation. And some same-sex attracted Christians are also graced to be with an opposite-sex partner. I found this crazy when I came into the side B world. I met all of these people who were gay or same-sex attracted, but God had given them a desire for an opposite-sex spouse, and it was real, but their orientation didn't change. That happens in about 15 to 20% of cases, but these mixed orientation marriages, they need pastoral care that's more intense. There are demands on those marriages that there wouldn't be if both spouses were just straight. So let's go to eunuchs now. I love eunuchs. They're the best. Jesus was a eunuch in an indirect way. So the eunuch's witness, celibacy as eschatological sign, not consolation. So in Isaiah 56, we have this radical text, which Augustine talks about in De Bono Conjugali and in De Virginitate, which he applies to the ethics of sex and marriage. And Jesus names this a third category, which maybe wasn't there as much in the Old Testament reality, but he names because of the fact he is the future Adam. He says, those who have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven. So there will be people, same-sex desire, with other difficulties that mean that they will have to become eunuchs. They won't be able to marry. And this is like a sacred part of the kingdom. And this is Jesus himself. He doesn't marry. So it's self-referential in some way, which I think is fascinating. And in a culture that attached honor exclusively to progeny, this is completely scandalous and crazy. He would be seen as a Jewish heretic for sure. Okay? But he's not a Jewish heretic because in the prophets it says, to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbaths, who choose what pleases me and hold fast to my covenant, I will give within my temple and its walls a memorial and a name. A memorial in the Hebrew is actually referring to a sexual appendage. So this is quite a lot of play in this passage, exegetically. That says a name, Hashem, was your progeny, like Abraham's seed. Abraham's name was Isaac. That was his future. So I'm going to give you something better than even your future progeny. I'm going to give you this name better than sons and daughters. And Jesus embodies that name. He is that name. So Gregory of Nyssa in De Virginitate, virginity is a bond of union between the divine and human, a channel drawing the deity into human estate while lifting human desire toward the heavenly. Celibacy on this account is not a deprivation, but an anticipation, eros refined until it becomes a form of agape. This is Gregory of Nyssa's view. And also, the aseity of God, the fact God doesn't need anything outside God's self, is somehow reflected in celibacy. That the celibate person doesn't need a partner, but they are somehow whole as they are. And yet, of course, they need others. God desires to create out of that fullness. Do you see how virginity or celibacy reflects that aseity of God? That's what Gregory of Nyssa says. So he adds a Trinitarian systematic element to celibacy, starting the party early. Oliver Donovan says this, and I think it really helps us. We are not invited to live in the created order as though there had been no cross. The resurrection body of Christ bears nail prints, and therefore the life of those who follow him means taking up the cross. The path to full participation lies through being excluded. What? Discipleship involves us in the suffering of exclusion from various forms of the created good, which are our right and privilege as Adam's restored children. Christ's followers are called to accept exclusion from the created good as the necessary price of a true and unqualified witness to it. In other words, Jesus says, you must lose your life to gain it. You must allow yourself to be excluded from certain created goods that feel like you're right. I'm going to fast. I'm going to not have sex before marriage. I'm going to do all of these things that are my attempt without the holy reordering of God to try to enjoy creation in and of itself. I'm going to give that up. And so we all have to do that. We all have to live in light of this cross-shaped ethical reality. The celibate Christian is not the church's awkward exception, but its prophetic witness to this discipleship truth. So 6 commitments for your consulting room at church. or your space when you discuss this stuff as the church. 1, listen before you diagnose. The first pastoral act is attention. Henry Nouwen says, self-rejection is the greatest enemy of the spiritual life. Do not confirm self-rejection. That would be the one thing I would say. Queer people already feel rejected enough. They just need to know they're loved. They just need to know they're accepted. They just need to know it's all going to be okay. Like, Jesus has made you right with him anyway. And surrendering to that reality first before you try to work out your ethics is so important. Sexuality is first a theodicy question, a question of suffering and evil. It is second an ethical question. So you have to bring in listen before you try to fix someone's situation. Second, refuse the heterosexuality gospel. If you are straight and you see that, call it out. Stand up against it. Say, no, we are not some holy club of married people looking down on the suffering of gay people. No. I'm sorry, I'm not righteous because I'm heterosexual. I'm righteous because Jesus saved me. Because he died and rose again, and he gave me faith, and his faithfulness made my faith rectifying. Know the gospel. Know the counterfeit heterosexist version, and know the other diversity kind of progressive version that's not true either. Really know the gospel. I know it sounds simple, but it's really important that you can call out those counterfeits when they come. Third, teach the order of love before the ethic. So begin with Augustine's anthropology. Only then does the ethic become intelligible rather than cruel. You're made for love. You have loves. You're called for those loves to be given to God, to be purged and tested, and then transformed to be a positive part of your life. You were created as a desiring being, as a loving being, and sexual desire is part of that, but it's also frustrated by the fall. So come and give yourself to God. Let your loves be reordered. Don't come to your ethical conclusion too quickly, and then go forward from a place of actual transformation within. So not extrinsic obedience being forced upon a person, but intrinsic change that leads to outward obedience. That is the way, that's the only way. And Paul kind of puts it this way: the only thing that matters is faith expressing itself through love. So I said when I got consecrated by N.T. Wright in Oxford, and I wear marriage ring to Jesus. No, I wear this consecration ring to mark my commitment to Jesus. I said it wasn't really about my sexuality. It was about the faith that God gave me to reinterpret my sexuality. So it's actually about the gift of faith expressing itself through love. That's what people need. That's what will change it from being a repressive, harmful, natural ethic to actually a sacramental ethic that's beautiful, and more beautiful than its compromises. Fourth, build friendship structures, not just marriages. Marriages are forms of friendship with extra goods that have greater demands, but we're all friends. We need to work out how to be friends, sometimes in ways that make marriage a bit more porous, but still retain its distinction, and ways in which a celibate person becomes important to a marriage, and a marriage becomes important to a celibate person. We need to have an interdependence between marriage and celibacy, not a competitive relationship between marriage and celibacy. A sign that someone's marriage is unhealthy is that they don't understand celibacy. A sign that someone's celibacy is unhealthy is that they hate marriage. So we have to really work. It should be interdependent. And that doesn't mean there isn't also another side where you really suffer as a celibate person sometimes around marriages that aren't well ordered to God's love. When I'm in a marriage that's well ordered to God's love, as a celibate person, I don't really suffer. I feel like my vocation is celebrated in the marriage because it's assigned to what I'm living out as a force sign. So there's no conflict. But when the marriage is not rightly ordered and it's an idol, it's hell. I don't want to be around it because it makes my celibacy disappear. It makes me disappear because there's no eschaton. There's no future. So we need to make friendship the center, marriage a form of friendship, and celibacy something that renews marriage, and marriage that's rightly ordered, renewing celibacy, and allowing indirect participation in the created goods that marriage has for celibate people. Raising children, particularly, we should be having lots of fathers, mothers, etc., helping out with the marital things, and we should have committed couples to celibate where they would lay down their marriage for their celibate friend. So this kind of interweaving, I think, really pleases Jesus, and embodies what he wanted to happen with marriage and celibacy. I find it interesting that Jesus doesn't really have any married friends that he's close to. Go look in the Gospels. Who is the person that he most is closest to? You could say John, but it's Lazarus. Was Lazarus married? No. Who were Lazarus's closest? The two Marys. They lived in a strange household for a Jewish era. But that's because he probably couldn't find married people who had yet ordered their marriage around this kingdom reality. This is why Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7, hey, you married people, act as if you're not married. He's not saying don't be married. He's trying to relativize that marriage to this greater reality so it's healthy. And he says, spend some time not just lovey-dovey in the bed together, spend some time praying and being reminded of what's coming. I think that's why he says pray for a time. But also enjoy the sexual good of marriage. It's a good thing. Finally, honor the wound without sanctifying it. We all have wounds in these areas. We all have experiences of trauma. We all have a million layers, and there's wounds that need airing and oxygenation, and they need careful kind of attention. But we don't want to sanctify what's coming out of a wound. We need the wound to start to be healed, to gain scar tissue, and then sanctification can happen. But if you try to sanctify an unhealed wound, it just produces a terror and a mess. So we have to learn the pastoral discipline of healing wounds and allowing wounds to then speak with glory. This is a Christian skill. We find the glory of God in the wound, but the wound also needs healing. And we need to become expert wounded healers. Jesus was an expert wounded healer. We need to treat celibacy as a charism, not a failure mode. The consecrated life is ancient, Christological, joyful. It is what the church already has, if it will remember it. We just need to do some remembering of our own tradition. It's so beautiful. It's not necessarily repressive. It's intimate or eros that can be figured in celibacy. So, eros and agape, not eros versus agape. Benedict XVI, God is the absolute and ultimate source of all being. But this universal principle of creation, the logos, primordial reason, is at the same time a lover with a passion of a true love. Eros is thus supremely ennobled, yet at the same time it is so purified as to become one with agape. One of my biggest issues with a progressive revisionist view of sexuality in the church is that it instills a split between the creator and the redeemer. What the creator shapes in creation is not what the redeemer wills for creation. So you end up with two gods. Whereas I love in this Benedict kind of quote, they're together. The logos, the principle of creation, is at the same time this eschatological eros, love that completes creation and transforms it into something greater. So thank you for listening. There's so much more to say about these questions, but it's an honor to share some of the treasures that I've learned in scholarship and in my own experience. So thank you.